My own brother looked me in the eye and destroyed my life with a single lie. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, Karen slid her phone across our kitchen table, her face already broken. Screenshots. Hotel receipts. Intimate messages. All carrying my name. But none of it was real. My brother Sonny had built the perfect illusion, convincing the woman I loved, and everyone I trusted that I had betrayed them. In that moment, my world collapsed. The pain of being cheated on, framed, and abandoned by my own family hit like a knife to the chest. Heartbroken and completely alone, I vanished. But what they didn't know was that I would return stronger than they could imagine. Bringing it up. That was his actual skill, not the lying itself, the way he made you feel unreasonable for noticing. Our dad, Harlan, spent 30 years as a civil court clerk. You'd think that'd make him harder to fool. It made him easier. He'd seen enough genuine ugliness in that job that when things at home looked clean on the surface, he chose the surface every time. My mom, Preeti, is a genuinely warm person. She just cannot hold her position when a room gets uncomfortable. The moment a conflict starts pulling in two directions, she moves toward whoever is making the most noise. It's not weakness, exactly. It's just the way she's wired. Sonny understood both of them better than they understood themselves, and he used it. I'm 3 years younger than him. Where he was loud, I was quiet. Where he filled every room he walked into, I tended to watch from the edges and figure out what was actually happening. We weren't close growing up, but we weren't enemies, either. We were just different people who happened to share a last name. I told myself that was enough, that there was a floor, some basic line that brothers just didn't cross with each other. That was the only thing I was ever genuinely wrong about. By the time I was 24, my life was exactly what I'd been building toward. I had a solid mid-level role at a data infrastructure firm, not glamorous, but I was good at it, and I knew where it was going. I had my own apartment. I had savings, and I had Karen. Karen was an urban planner. She cared deeply about how spaces worked, how cities breathed, whether the infrastructure people walked through every day was actually built for them or just built to look like it was. That's who she was. Someone who looked at the thing underneath the surface. Practical. Sharp. She had exactly zero tolerance for people who performed emotions instead of having them. We'd been together 4 years when I proposed. No elaborate setup, no rented rooftop. I asked her over dinner at the kitchen table of my apartment on a Tuesday night, because that's where we actually lived our life, not in produced moments. She said yes, before I finished the sentence. I loved her in the specific way that doesn't make good stories. Consistent, unglamorous, built on 4 years of knowing exactly who the other person was. Sonny called it boring once at a family dinner, laughed while he said it, like he was doing me a favor by pointing it out. I remember Karen setting her fork down and looking at him for a second before going back to her food. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The engagement dinner was at my parents' house. Both families, decent food, Harlan opening a bottle of wine he'd been saving. Sonny gave a toast. It started about me and Karen and drifted, as Sonny's toasts always did, into a long and winding tribute to his own perspective on relationships, success, timing. By the end of it, he was the main character of the story and I was a supporting role in my own engagement. People laughed. He sat down looking satisfied. I noticed. I filed it away. I did not think it was the beginning of anything. 6 months after that dinner, I was at work when Karen texted me, "Can you come home early today?" That was it. No context. I looked at it for a second, tried to read the tone, and couldn't get a clear read. Karen wasn't a dramatic texter. She didn't summon me home in the middle of a Tuesday for nothing, but she also didn't do the thing people do when something's actually wrong. The run-on message, the excessive punctuation, the "we need to talk" that announces itself. This was just a single clean sentence, which somehow made it worse. I told my manager I had a personal thing, and left an hour early, drove home, let myself in. Karen was sitting at the kitchen table, not the couch, not standing in the kitchen, the table, which we basically only used when something needed to be formally discussed. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her phone was face up on the table beside her. She didn't look upset. She looked like someone who had already finished being upset and moved through it into something else entirely. She looked done. She looked at me once, just once, and then she slid the phone across the table toward me without saying a word. The phone screen was on. I picked it up. It took me about 4 seconds to understand what I was looking at, and another 10 to understand what it meant. Screenshots of a conversation. iMessage format. My name at the top. My number. The other contact saved as Priya. It started casual, friendly in a way that had a direction to it. By the third scroll, it had a very clear direction. Hotel names, dates, specific language that I will not repeat here because it doesn't matter and I don't want it in writing again. I kept scrolling because I think part of my brain believed that if I got to the bottom of it, there would be something that broke the illusion. Some pixel out of place. Some timestamp that didn't add up in an obvious way. There were photos, check-in screenshots from a hotel I'd supposedly been at on a Thursday night 3 months ago. I remember that Thursday. I'd worked late, eaten a sandwich at my desk, driven home, and watched 40 minutes of television before falling asleep. I set the phone down. Karen still hadn't said anything. "This isn't real," I said. She nodded slowly, like she'd expected exactly those words in exactly that order. "Karen." I pushed the phone back toward her. "I don't know, Apriya. I have never. This is fabricated. Someone made this." She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before and hoped to never see again. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been easier. It was the look of someone who had already run every version of this conversation in their head, including the one where I said exactly what I was saying, and had already decided what it meant. "Sonny showed me," she said. "He said he found out 2 weeks ago and didn't know how to tell me. He said he'd been going back and forth about whether to say anything at all." There it was. I sat back in my chair and just held that for a moment. Let the full shape of it arrive. Because here's the thing about Sonny that I should have factored in more carefully. He never strikes without preparation. Whatever you're walking into with him, he's already been there. He'd spent 2 weeks, probably longer, setting the table before Karen ever saw a single screenshot. 2 weeks of being concerned, of mentioning offhand that Reed seemed distracted lately, seemed like he was carrying something, of being the worried older brother who hated to even bring this up but cared too much to stay quiet. By the time those images hit Karen's phone, she didn't receive them as a shock. She received them as a confirmation of something she'd already been softly guided toward believing. That's not seduction. That's architecture. I went to my parents that evening. I sat down with Harlan and Preeti at their kitchen table, the same table I'd eaten at every day for the first 18 years of my life, and I walked them through it, told them what Karen had shown me, told them it was fabricated, told them I needed them to hear me out before forming any conclusions. Harlan listened with his arms crossed, which was never a good sign with him. 20 minutes into the conversation, the front door opened and Sonny walked in. I still don't know if he was called, or if he just knew. Both are possible with him. He came in looking exactly the way you'd need to look if you were playing the role of heartbroken older brother who'd done an agonizing but necessary thing. Shoulders slightly forward, expression carrying the specific weight of someone who'd sacrificed their own comfort for the sake of honesty. He sat down, looked at me once with something almost like apology on his face, and then told my parents he hadn't wanted it to come to this. My mother started crying within 4 minutes. My father put his hand on Sonny's shoulder. I sat there and watched it happen and understood, with a clarity that was almost peaceful, that there was nothing I could say in that room that would matter. The verdict had been reached before I arrived. I was there for the formality of it. I drove home, didn't sleep. The engagement was called off before the week ended. Karen was calm about it in a way that was harder to deal with than if she'd been furious. She scheduled time to collect her things. She was organized and thorough and left nothing behind. The apartment felt like a rental unit by the time she was done. Neutral, like nobody had ever actually lived there. I didn't beg. I didn't follow her out to the parking lot. I told her once more, quietly, that what she'd been shown wasn't real. And she looked at me for a long moment and then said, "I hope that's true, Reed. I really do." And she left. 2 months later, she and Sonny were photographed together at a family friend's birthday. My cousin sent me the picture without comment. I didn't respond. A month after that, it was Instagram, a weekend trip, his hand on her shoulder. The caption was something short and unbothered. The family closed ranks in that quiet way families do when they've collectively decided on a version of events. Nobody called to check on me. Nobody asked for my side again. I was the difficult chapter, the one you acknowledge happened but don't linger on. My friend Dex reached out once. We'd been close for years, mutual friends between me and Karen. He met me for coffee and spent most of it looking at the table. Eventually he said, "I saw them. The screenshots. Karen showed a few of us early on. I think she was trying to, I don't know, process it. They looked real. Man, I want you to know, I'm not saying that as an excuse. They looked real." I told him I understood, and then I went home, opened my laptop, and did something I'd been meaning to do since the night Karen first showed me the phone. I pulled up the image metadata on the hotel check-in photo Sonny had included in the fabricated thread, the one that had been forwarded to Dex and then to me in a separate message weeks later, which meant it had traveled through enough hands that the original file was still intact. The creation timestamp on that image file was dated 3 weeks before the conversation it was supposedly taken during. The photo existed before the exchange it was meant to document. It wasn't taken as evidence of something that happened. It was made in advance and inserted afterward. I had proof. I sat with that for a long time, and then I understood the problem. I had proof, and I was surrounded by people who had already decided, who had collectively agreed on a story and organized their behavior around it. Taking that metadata screenshot to my parents, to Karen, to anyone in that orbit, it would look like exactly what a guilty person would manufacture after the fact. Sonny would say I'd edited it. Someone would agree with him. The room would shift. And I'd lose again. There was no version of fighting this from inside the story. So I made a decision. I closed my laptop, opened Zillow, started looking at apartments in cities I'd never lived in. I found an apartment in Raleigh on a Thursday night. By Saturday morning, I had signed a sublease, emailed my landlord, and started pulling my life off the walls, not dramatically. I wasn't in that mode. I was in the mode of someone who has identified a problem and is executing a solution. I packed what mattered into 2 bags. Everything else I either sold online over the next 48 hours or left for whoever came next. The furniture, the kitchen stuff, the things Karen hadn't taken, gone. I did not call my parents. I did not go by Sunny's place. I did not text Karen. I changed my phone number on Sunday, deactivated every social media account I had, and drove out of that city on a Monday before sunrise. No note, no explanation, nothing. I want to be clear about what that decision was, and what it wasn't. It wasn't running. I wasn't fleeing in defeat. I'd just done a completely honest audit of the situation and arrived at a simple conclusion. Every tool available to me inside that environment was compromised. My family had picked their version. Karen had picked her version. My evidence would be dismissed, reframed, weaponized back against me before I could even finish presenting it. The only leverage I had, the only thing that couldn't be taken from me, or spun into something it wasn't, was my absence. Let them explain that. Let them build a story around a person who simply ceased to be there. I learned later, through the one cousin I eventually let back into my life at a careful distance, that my disappearance had genuinely disturbed people in a way my fighting back never would have. My mother apparently called my phone for 2 weeks before accepting the number was dead. My father, who had sat across from me at that table with his hand on Sunny's shoulder, drove past my old apartment 3 times before someone told him I'd broken the lease. There's something in that worth noting. People who have decided you're guilty still don't actually expect you to leave. They expect you to keep showing up and arguing, because that's what keeps them at the center. When you remove yourself completely, you take the center with you. Sunny, from what I gathered, told everyone I'd clearly had a breakdown, that it was sad, that he hoped I was okay. I was fine. Raleigh was nobody's city to me. No history, no associations, nothing that reminded me of anything. I sublet a room from a grad student who was never home, took contract work through a data services platform, and kept a schedule that was less a lifestyle than a mechanism for getting through time. Wake up, work, eat, sleep. I wasn't happy. I wasn't unhappy. I was just running the clock while something inside me recalibrated. The anger was there. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't, but I'd learned something about anger growing up alongside Sunny. The people who act on it immediately, visibly, loudly, they lose. They always lose. Anger displayed as leverage surrendered. The anger I had needed to be kept somewhere it could do actual work, which meant I had to be patient with it in a way that didn't come naturally, but that I forced myself to practice. By year 2, I'd saved enough to start thinking bigger. A guy named Preet, we'd overlapped for 1 semester in college, stayed loosely in touch, had been building a data infrastructure product targeting mid-size healthcare and logistics firms. Good idea. Underfunded. Needed someone who understood the technical architecture he was trying to sell. We got on a call. Then another. 3 months later we were partners. I put in my savings. He put in the product. We worked out of coffee shops in his spare bedroom, and didn't pay ourselves a real salary for 11 months. I worked 14-hour days, not because I was passionate in any romantic sense, because the hours needed to be filled with something that built towards something, or they would just be hours spent sitting with what Sunny had done. I refused to give him that real estate in my head, so I worked. We registered the company under a holding entity, Vector Group. My name appeared nowhere in any public-facing material, not on the website, not in press releases, not in the incorporation documents that were available through a basic search. This was partly strategic and partly instinct. I'd watched what happened when Sunny controlled the narrative about me. I had no interest in being findable while I was still building. Year 3, Vector was profitable. Not impressive profitable, just actually making money, which in that market at that stage meant we'd done something real. Year 4, we acquired 2 smaller firms, both of them quietly and efficiently. I handled the due diligence personally. Preet handled the relationships. We didn't celebrate. We just kept going. Meanwhile, the world I'd left kept moving. Sunny got promoted to sales director at a mid-tier firm. He had a LinkedIn banner to mark the occasion. He posted about leadership and authenticity and building things that last. I saw it quarterly, not obsessively, just the way you occasionally check the weather in a city you used to live in. He and Karen got married. My cousin mentioned it in a message. No ceremony details, just a single line dropped into an unrelated conversation, like she wasn't sure whether to tell me and decided to bury it. I read it, sat with it for a few minutes, and then closed my phone and went back to the contract I'd been reviewing. I want to say that didn't land anywhere. I'd be slightly lying. It landed briefly in the specific place where something you once genuinely loved used to live, and then it passed. That's the honest version. The family didn't reach out. I hadn't expected them to. By 29, Vector Group was worth north of $20 million, not on paper, actual worth, conservatively assessed based on revenue and the 2 acquisitions, and a third we were 2 months from closing. I was living in a good apartment, wearing good suits because I'd learned that how you present in a room affects how rooms receive you, and I was, genuinely, not performatively okay. I'd built something Sonny couldn't touch because he didn't know it existed. That mattered to me in a way I can't fully articulate. He'd taken the life I had, so I built one he couldn't see coming. Then my cousin Rohan sent me a message. It was brief. Nani Veena, my grandmother, the person in that entire family I had zero complicated feelings about, was turning 80. The whole family was gathering. Rohan said she'd asked for me specifically, by name, more than once. I sat with that for a week. Nani Veena hadn't done anything. She was 80 years old, and she wanted to see her grandson, and I had been gone for 5 years. That was the entire calculation. Everything else I could leave outside. I messaged Rohan back, told him I'd be there, and then I made 3 phone calls. Not to family, not to anyone connected to that life. The first was to a private investigator named Osei, who had been quietly building a file for me for the past 8 months on Sonny's financial activity at his employer. The second was to a digital forensic specialist I'd used on a corporate case through Vector to confirm the status of a report I'd commissioned. The third was to my legal team. I wasn't going home to reconnect. I was going home because everything I'd spent 5 years building was now fully in position. I drove up to Nani Veena's house on a Saturday afternoon in October. Same street, same neighborhood. The oak tree in her front yard had grown wider, but not taller, which struck me as exactly right. Some things just get more solid with time instead of reaching for anything new. I parked at the curb, cut the engine, and sat for about 30 seconds. Not to collect myself, just because I'd been driving for a while and my back was stiff. I stepped out, straightened my jacket, and walked up the path. The yard had maybe 25 people in it already. Round tables, folding chairs, the kind of setup Preeti always organized for family events. Coordinated but not catered. Somewhere between casual and deliberate. I heard the noise before I fully registered the faces. Then the noise dropped in the specific way that happens when a room, or a yard, becomes aware of something unexpected. I kept walking toward the door. My mother saw me first. She was standing near the drink table with an aunt, and she went completely still mid-sentence. The expression on her face covered a lot of ground very quickly. Surprise, guilt, something that looked like relief, and underneath all of it, the particular discomfort of someone encountering the consequence of a choice they'd made and hadn't fully reckoned with yet. My father was near the back of the yard. He turned when the noise shifted, saw me, and straightened in the way he always did when he didn't know how to arrange his face. Shoulders back, jaw forward, the old court clerk instinct for protecting composure in uncomfortable situations. Sonny was mid-conversation with one of my uncles. He stopped talking. I watched him do the mental calculation in real time. That half-second where a person's eyes get very still while their brain processes something it wasn't prepared for. Then his expression resettled into something easy and open, which was exactly what I expected. Sonny was never more dangerous than when he was surprised. Surprise just made him faster. Karen was near the side of the house with 2 women I recognized as cousins. She turned when the yard shifted and looked at me across maybe 30 feet of lawn. I can't describe her expression better than this. It was the face of someone doing rapid and unwanted math. I didn't hold any of their gazes. I walked straight to Nani Veena. She was sitting in the good chair someone had brought out from her living room and placed in the center of the garden because she was 80 years old and had earned the good chair. She saw me coming and her entire face rearranged itself into something that required absolutely no interpretation. She grabbed both my hands when I reached her, said my name once, and held on for a moment longer than necessary. I wished her happy birthday, sat in the empty chair beside her, and asked her about her garden. We talked for 10 minutes. The yard slowly resumed its noise around us. I could feel people watching and didn't particularly mind. Sonny came over while I was getting a drink. He moved the way he always moved in rooms, like he was doing you a favor by crossing them in your direction. Big smile, body language open and deliberate, the full performance of a man who has nothing to hide because he's genuinely delighted to see you. Reed. He put his arm out. I shook his hand, didn't move toward him. The handshake was brief and functional, and told him exactly what he needed to know without me having to say a word. Man. He said, adjusting smoothly. 5 years. You look good. You, too, I said, and we talked, surface level, the weather of conversation, how's the city, how's work. The kind of exchange that communicates nothing and is entirely about establishing tone. I was polite, measured. I gave him nothing to react to, which I knew from a lifetime of watching him operate, was the thing he found hardest to work with. Sonny was built for reactions. He read them, adjusted, redirected, neutral, gave him nothing to grip. He mentioned the job, casual, like it came up naturally, a big opportunity, VP of sales at a firm called Arcova Solutions. Final round interviews, potentially life-changing, he said. His eyes moved to my face when he said it, checking for something. I've heard of them, I said. He waited for more. I didn't give him more. I asked him a question about the catering and he answered it and we finished our drinks and the conversation ended. Dinner moved the way family dinners move when something unspoken is occupying the table. My father asked me a question about work, vague, non-committal, the conversational equivalent of testing ice. I gave him a clean, non-theatrical answer. He nodded. The ice held. My mother refilled my glass twice without being asked. It was the only apology she was capable of in that moment, and I let it stand as one. Karen sat at the far end of the table, and we didn't speak. She passed the bread in my direction once, and I took a piece and said, "Thank you." And that was the full extent of it. Sonny watched the two of us nod, and I could see him trying to determine whether that was good for him or bad for him. After the plates were cleared and people were moving between conversations, I found Dex near the side gate. He'd arrived late, which was typical for him, and had been hovering at the edges of the gathering with the careful energy of someone who'd been caught between two people he cared about and still felt bad about which way he'd leaned. I didn't make him work through that. "I need you to do something for me," I said quietly. "Tonight. Before anyone leaves." He looked at me. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and took out a folder. Not thick, 4 pages, clean and ordered. The metadata report, the digital forensics summary, and a printed screenshot of a Reddit post made by a burner account 11 months before Karen received the fabricated images. A post asking, in plain and specific language, how to convincingly fabricate iMessage screenshots. The account had been deleted. I'd had it recovered. I held the folder out to Dex. "Give this to Karen," I said, not quietly, not pulled aside, somewhere private. "I need her to read it here, with people around her. She'll understand why when she opens it." Dex looked at the folder, looked at me, took it. I walked back to the table, sat down next to Nani Vina, and accepted a slice of the cake someone was cutting. And then I watched Dex cross the yard toward Karen. Dex reached Karen while she was standing with the two cousins, half turned toward a conversation she wasn't fully in. I watched him say something brief, watched her glance at the folder, watched the cousins drift politely away. In that instinctive way, people give space when a private thing is being handed over. Karen took the folder, opened it. I ate my cake. The first page was the metadata report, technical, formatted, the kind of document that requires a moment to orient yourself inside. I saw her eyes moving down it, and then stop, and then move back up to the top to reread something. The second page was the forensic summary, shorter, plainer language, designed specifically to be understood by someone without a technical background. I'd asked for that when I commissioned it. She got to the third page, the Reddit screenshot, and went completely still. Not the stillness of confusion, the stillness of someone whose entire internal architecture has just been handed a piece of information that requires every other piece to be repositioned around it. Sonny saw her from across the yard. I don't know exactly what he read in her posture from that distance, but whatever it was made him set his drink down and start moving toward her. He had the controlled walk of someone who is alarmed but doesn't want to look alarmed, which on Sonny was a very specific gear I'd seen exactly twice in my life before tonight. He reached her, said something low. She held up the third page, the Reddit post, without looking at him. Just raised it between them. The thing about a lie that's been running for 5 years is that the person who built it still has to stand inside it when the foundation goes. Sonny looked at that page and said something. I couldn't hear it from where I was sitting. Karen said something back. Still quiet, still contained. But the two cousins who drifted away were now drifting back in that involuntary way. And an uncle 2 tables over had registered that something was happening and stopped his own conversation. Sonny tried again. His voice was slightly louder this time, which was a mistake. With Sonny, volume was always a tell. He got quieter when he was confident and louder when he was managing something that was slipping. Karen turned and looked at him with an expression I was too far away to fully read, but whatever it was, made him stop talking mid-sentence. Then she said something, not loudly, but clearly, in the direction of the table nearest to her, where my aunt and 2 of her daughters were sitting. I heard 3 words carry across the yard. Fabricated the evidence. The table went quiet. Then the table next to it. I put my fork down. I wasn't going to enjoy this in any theatrical sense, but to be precise about what I felt in that moment, not satisfaction exactly, more like the specific relief of a thing that has been structurally wrong for 5 years finally being named correctly in a room full of people who needed to hear it. Sonny looked across the yard and found me. I looked back at him, didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't perform anything, just held the eye contact for a second and then looked back at Nani Vina. who had been watching me with an expression that suggested she understood considerably more about what was happening than she'd let on. My father stood up from his chair. My mother had her hand over her mouth. The yard had the quality of a room where everyone has stopped pretending to have a separate conversation. Sonny tried the denial routine, raised his voice to a register I recognized, the one he used when he needed to reframe something fast. Project Confidence. Make the room feel like the person questioning him was the unreasonable one. He said the documents were fabricated, that I'd manufactured them. That this was exactly the kind of thing someone did when they couldn't accept that a relationship had ended. He said it to a yard full of people who were holding printed forensic evidence. It didn't work the way it used to. That was the difference 5 years made. Sonny had always operated on the advantage of being first, of setting the story before anyone else could. Tonight he was second. The documents had arrived before his explanation. The room had read the material before he could tell them what it meant. He looked for my father. Harlan was standing very still with his arms crossed and an expression on his face I'd never seen before. Not anger, not denial. Just the look of a man doing a very slow and uncomfortable accounting of the past 5 years. Sonny didn't get the shoulder that night. I left the gathering shortly after. Said goodbye to Nani Veena. Shook Rohan's hand. Walked to my car. I didn't speak to Sonny again. I didn't seek out Karen or my parents. What needed to happen had happened, and adding words to it would have been indulgence. The following morning I called my legal team. The whistleblower complaint, based on 8 months of Aussie's documentation of Sonny's financial activity at his employer, was filed with the State Financial Crimes Division that afternoon. It detailed the ghost vendor account, the skimmed commission overrides, the redirected client payments, not large amounts individually, significant collectively, and more importantly, documented. Sonny's employer launched an internal audit 10 days later. Sonny was placed on administrative leave within the week. I heard this through Rohan, who was passing information in both directions now without being asked. He'd been at the gathering, he'd seen what he'd seen, and he'd clearly made a decision about which side of this he was standing on. Karen, from what Rohan said, had moved to the guest room the night of the gathering. She wasn't explosive about it. She was doing the cold and deliberate thing that, if you knew her, was actually far more final. She'd consulted a lawyer by the end of the following week, quietly, without announcing it. Sonny's life was structured like a table with 4 legs. His job, his marriage, his reputation, and the family narrative he'd spent years maintaining. Inside 3 weeks, 2 legs were gone and a third was badly compromised. He needed something to stabilize on, something that could still be turned around. He called his contact at Arcova Solutions and pushed for the final interview decision. He needed the VP role, needed the income, the title, something that said he was still standing. The contact confirmed the final round could be moved up. The interview was scheduled. Rohan mentioned it offhand. Sonny's got some big interview next week. Seems like he's really counting on it. And I told him I was aware, left it at that. Sonny got dressed on interview day in his best suit, rehearsed his pitch, walked into the Arcova Solutions building with everything he had left loaded into the next 90 minutes. He was shown to a conference room on the 4th floor. 2 senior staff members he recognized from earlier rounds were already seated. Then the door opened again. I walked in, sat on the table, and sat down across from him. Sonny's face did what I knew it would do. Ran through 4 distinct expressions in about 3 seconds. Recognition, disbelief, the rapid internal calculation of someone trying to find an angle, and then, underneath all of it, something I had never once seen on my brother's face in 30 years of watching him operate: fear. Not the performed kind, the real kind, the kind that arrives when a person understands, fully and without available exit, that the room they have walked into was built specifically for them. I opened my folder, looked at the first page, then looked up at him. "Let's get started," I said. "I want to be precise about what happened in that room because I think people expect a certain kind of scene, and that's not what it was." I didn't monologue. I didn't lay out everything I knew and watch him squirm through a theatrical reckoning. I conducted the interview, real questions, structured evaluation, the same process every other final round candidate had gone through. I asked him about pipeline management, about his approach to enterprise sales cycles, about how he handled losing a deal he'd expected to close. I gave him every opportunity to demonstrate the thing he'd always been genuinely good at: working a room, projecting confidence, making people believe in whatever version of events he was selling. He was terrible, not because the questions were hard, because he couldn't locate his footing. He kept waiting for the other thing to start: the confrontation, the accusation, the moment where I dropped the professional frame and became his brother again. That moment never came, and not knowing when it was coming made it impossible for him to be fully present for what was actually in front of him. He rushed answers, lost his thread twice. The charm was there, but it was running on no foundation, like watching someone perform a magic trick while visibly checking their own sleeves. At the end, I closed the folder and said, "We'll be in touch." He looked at me for a long moment, then said, very quietly, "Read." I stood up, extended my hand across the table. He shook it. What else was he going to do? I walked out. The formal decision came through